Yes, we're ready.
All right, for the jury.
All right, everyone, please be seated. Defense, call your next witness.
Dr. William Anderson.
All right. So ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Anderson is by Zoom. This is one of the witnesses that both parties agreed if he was going to be recalled, he could testify by Zoom. Is that correct, State?
Yes, Your Honor. And just for the record, we did rest again on our.
Yes.
And yes, we also agreed to Zoom. Judge.
All right, thank you. Dr. Anderson, you're still under oath.
Yes, Your Honor, I understand.
All right, thank you. Defense, you may proceed.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson, I just had a few follow-up questions for you, and we talked briefly on the phone, correct? A few
Yes,
minutes
we
ago.
did.
And let me ask you about a couple of things. The laceration on the inside of Olivia's upper lip. Doctor, you know Dr. Kim Molina, correct?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and she's a colleague of yours?
Yes.
And she testified a little earlier that that there were several reasons that she didn't think that laceration was caused by, well, first she said by intubation, because of the shape of it, or because of the it was vertical rather than
Your Honor, I'm gonna object to-
horizontal rather than vertical.
To counsel testifying.
All right, that would be sustained.
Okay, if she testified that she didn't believe it was caused by intubation because it was horizontal rather than vertical, would that change anything about your testimony?
Well, I think actually it's vertical rather than horizontal. But yeah, I also did not say it was during the intubation per se, but when they put the tape on, there was a plastic tube, which I pointed out to the jury earlier, is that same linear configuration. If the tape is pressing the tube against the gum from the outside, then you can get that type. And that's a very superficial. So I wouldn't be surprised that it hadn't been bleeding much because it's a very superficial. That's why I don't think it's consistent with a blow either, because one of the fact that it wasn't found on first admission, but the second is that it's not deep enough, and it would be tearing of the soft tissue deep to the actual mucosa of the lip.
Okay. And
so it
then,
occurred after the intubation when they were placing the various tubes.
Okay. So, but it's not during the insertion of it's not the intubation itself.
Correct, exactly.
Okay. And then is that would that be a pressure wound?
More or less, yeah. But in the emergency intubation, they got to be doing a lot of things. So it's just one of those things that can occur.
Okay. And Then I wanted to ask you about the fracture, the ossification. Dr. Molina testified that wasn't, she did not testify that it was a fracture, but she testified it was consistent with a fracture. And she said it was nowhere near the growth plate. Do you?
Well, I was a little confused about that because the picture shows it a little bit, but you can't really get a good idea from the picture. I couldn't. But the medical examiner describes that as the distal portion of the bone. So that was, wherever that occurred. But wherever it occurred, I think it corresponded to what the radiologist referred to as areas of, some calcifications and changes, which are on both sides. And again, I would say that this really needs to be looked at by somebody who's expert in pediatric bone pathology. That I don't feel qualified, as I pointed out to the jury. I think this is a situation where you want to get an expert involved because it's a pretty significant issue, and have somebody, who does this all the time look at the slides and determine that, because there's so much variability in the pediatric population with the remolding of bones and so forth.
Okay. Is Dr. Molina, you're familiar with her qualifications? Is she qualified to make that call?
Well, no, and she's a very fine, she,
Just 1 second. There's been an objection.
I'm
What is
sorry.
your objection?
Speculation.
All right, that will be sustained.
Now,
Right.
no, you're good. We're not going to deal with that question. I'm going to ask you the DAI and the beta amyloid stain, beta amyloid precursor stain. That was not done, and Dr. Molina says that didn't need to be done because all it would do.
Sorry, I'm
is
gonna object to
confirm-
counsel testifying.
Can I finish the question,
Right,
Judge?
you can ask your question
Thank you.
and then state you can make your objection and the court will make a ruling.
So don't answer this yet, Dr. Anderson, but Dr. Molina says that would not be, that beta amyloid precursor stain was not necessary because they already knew there had been head trauma. Do you agree that it wouldn't be necessary in that case?
Your Honor, again, I object to the counsel
Right.
testifying.
That'll be overruled. You can answer the question.
Okay, thank you, Honor. In any scientific examination, it's important to get all the data and then decide your conclusions, not to decide you don't need it because you've already concluded that we know it's head trauma. The question is it high velocity or low velocity? And one of the ways we could be sure, and as I think as I testified earlier, it's not an all or none situation. It varies. There can be in some degree in a lesser injury, there can be more of this change in a more severe injury. But what you do is you do the testing first, and then you decide if you think. So you never say, because you will really prejudice your opinions if you start deciding what you're going to do based on what you think at the time prior to doing the analysis, and then you come to your conclusions after you've gotten all the information. So it's essential in a case like this that you would do any test available, and it includes the amyloid precursor, and also includes looking at the bone biopsy by an expert.
Okay. Well, and let me ask you though, what difference does it make if there was a DAI or not a DAI?
Well, it would be difficult to get a DAI situation in even a fall down even a couple of stairs. So that would be, if it were a high velocity impact injury, then you'd really be concerned that this was a more significant impact than even could occur that. And then, that was one of my suspicions in the first place. But that's why you would do the testing. But it certainly did not, the fact that it was a subdural developing a mass lesion rather than essentially the brain tamponading the bleeding, and the brain did not swell that quickly, and that this was more consistent with a lower velocity. But to nail that down, the amyloid stain would have been very helpful.
Okay.
And since it's a critical decision, I mean, is it sort of something you've got to do? So you know one way or another for sure that there's not in on limbo because it's obviously the major factor in determination.
And is that something you could have done, by the way, with what you had available to you?
Well, sure, I have.
Answered.
Just one second.
Objection to asked and answered. That was already.
That'd be sustained.
And then just so that we're clear, if there's a DAI, does that indicate a high velocity or low velocity?
The higher velocity, the more of the DAI change you're going to see. In a low velocity, you may not see any. In a high velocity, you're going to see a lot. And then, of course, there's always the in-between zones. But that's why you need to get the stain to determine how much it is, how bad it is, if it's there, and so forth. And that you can only tell really by looking at the special stains and seeing what it shows. And then you come to a conclusion one way or another.
Okay. And the SDH, the subdural hematoma, does that indicate a DAI?
No, as I indicated before, the DAI, the brain swells very quickly. And as it swells, it basically stops the subdural from progressing. And if the brain is basically the subdural occurs and starts progressing, then that means that the brain's not swelling that fast. So it's more of a low velocity injury. And that's why that allows the blood to expand in the subdural space. So that's a low velocity.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
Okay. Hi, Dr. Anderson.
Hi.
So I want to clarify. What do you mean when you say that Dr. Molina is a colleague of yours?
Well, we're both forensic pathologists. I know her in passing. We both began in the same organization, National Association of Medical Examiners, American Board of Pathology, and I see her from time to time.
Okay, but you've never actually worked in the same facility together.
No, but pathologists have
Okay,
colleagues all over the country.
I just wanted to clarify that.
No, I did not.
Okay. So your testimony is that you considered the frenulum tear to be a superficial wound?
The laceration, yeah, it's a superficial laceration. It does not go down into the deep soft tissues, and there's very little bleeding associated with it. Normally, if a laceration, you also bleed. You see a lot of bleeding around as the blood goes out into the submucosa around the wound. You're going to see that. You don't really see much of that in this case.
Okay, but you do agree that the frenulum is completely gone, right?
It's hard to see the frenulum for sure. It goes up into that area. But the critical thing again is this was not there when they first examined the child.
Okay. So and your testimony today is that it wasn't at the time of intubation, but it would have had to have been after intubation for it to have occurred.
Yeah, and that's actually what I testified to when I was out there early in the week.
Okay. So the fact that there was evidence of healing on the frenulum doesn't affect that decision for you?
Well, I don't think there was much healing. It looked like a very fresh injury. No granulation tissue had formed. There wasn't any around that laceration. There wasn't any.
And again, your testimony is that it was from the tape when they taped it.
Right, the tape pressing that tube, which you can see going down right in that area. If you look at those pictures again, going right down in that area where the lip is, and then that tube is tightly taped to the, and then that presses against the underlying gum tissue.
Okay. And you testified before that you are not an expert, or you are not a pediatrician, correct?
Well, no, my qualifications. I'm a forensic pathologist, correct?
Okay. And you are not an expert in pediatrics?
No, that's correct.
Okay.
Other than, as it applies to autopsies, I'm pathologists, deal in children also. I mean, I've done many forensic autopsies on children, And
Okay.
I would say that evaluating those injuries, obviously, but I'm not a clinical pediatrician.
Okay, and just to understand, is your testimony that you consider a stairway fall that results in a subdural to be a low velocity subdural?
Yeah, the head, however the trauma occurs, it's low velocity because the brain swelling is slower than you would see in a diffuse axonal injury. And therefore that allows the blood to accumulate, what we call a mass effect, which is documented in the x-rays and at the autopsy. So
Okay,
that's a lower velocity injury.
so a low velocity injury that can take more than a day to become to the point where it's basically the brain is swollen up, such as Olivia's, correct?
Well, it depends on how rapidly the bleeding occurs. If it all occurs at one time, if there's on and off bleeding or not, but it doesn't occur within a few seconds that the brain, like a diffuse axonal injury, within a period of a couple of seconds and a few minutes at the most, where the brain swells so quickly that it stops the subdural hematoma from forming.
So if she had a low velocity, according to your testimony, if she had a low velocity fall down the stairs, it would not, she shouldn't have been, essentially brain dead for a few hours though.
No, it depends. As I said before, subdurals can, depending upon just what happens as far as the bleeding goes, how many vessels are torn, it can occur very quickly. And
Okay.
other times it may be extended periods of time.
Okay, so really it really doesn't make much of a difference then if it was a low velocity strike or a high velocity strike based on what you're saying.
Well, the difference is what has caused it,
Okay.
whether it was a fall or whether it's somebody.
I understand. Okay. And you would agree with me that you really you mentioned going over the data, looking at the data. So you agree that you need all the data before you make a report, correct? Yes or no?
Well, as much as you can get.
Okay. And you agree that data includes any known medical history as well as any other relevant circumstantial factors, right?
That has to be considered, yes.
Okay. Now, am I understanding your testimony to be that if not for your reanalysis of the frenulum tear, that you would still be standing by your previous finding that the most probable explanation for this fatal subdural was a blow to the face that caused Olivia to fall back and hit her head on something? Is that correct, that the frenulum tear is really what caused you to change your finding?
Well, correct. The absence of the frenulum tear takes away an entire portion of the pattern of injuries. So in that case, you have to change your analysis if you discover more information. And I discovered that later when I was going to the chart after the report was written. And I explained that, I think, to the jury the other day.
Okay, and the whole reason you changed your opinion as to the frenulum was because you decided to re-examine the medical records that you had used before, and in your re-examination of them, you determined that they should have seen it, right?
Yeah, well, they didn't, right? They didn't see it. They actually, it wasn't a question of their clinical care. It's a question of it wasn't there. And pathologists, as scientists, anytime, you never want to get locked into to saying one thing specifically. If you discover other things, you got to be willing to change your opinions.
Okay. I guess what I'm not understanding is why did you feel the need to completely re-examine the medical records you had already examined and already completed an entire report on and already made a finding on? Why did you feel the need to go and completely re-examine the records and then come up with a completely different conclusion based on that?
Well, because I was interested, I wanted to be sure I was thorough, and I wanted to make sure I hadn't made any mistakes. So I went back. I mean, it's fairly critical not to be too superficial on the case. And particularly this type of a case. So that's why I went back and I looked, because I was concerned that that there might have been some other reason. And the issue with the frenulum and the lip was, I focused on that. And then I looked at it, and then I went back and researched that and found that it was not the case. But I mean, that is the facts. So I don't have
Okay.
no problem changing if I have facts to change my opinions.
Okay. And again, it was that frenulum tear is really what the big difference was for you.
Yeah, because
Okay.
it indicates another directional injury. Multi-directional injuries are important in this type of case. And it
Okay.
indicated that. And if that didn't occur, then we have to seriously consider other possibilities.
Okay. And just for clarification, the lacerations that were on Olivia's head, did you find that was also consistent with the stairway fall?
No, those are all, no, of course not. Those are old, and some are completely healed and some are not. And there are multiple injuries.
Okay. Thank you. I'll pass the witness.
You started to say something about the difference in a low velocity and a high velocity injury. And then the prosecution said, oh, no, she stopped you. What was it you were saying about it? About the difference?
Well, no, I think we went on. I think she wanted clarification. That's why I said that the major reason you want to know the difference is because of the mechanism.
Yeah. And I'm just going to object to asked and answered.
That'll be overruled.
Okay, pass the witness.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, is this witness excused?
Excuse
Subject
from the
for
state.
recall.
Yes, Your Honor.
Excused?
Yes.
All right, Dr. Anderson, as you know, the rule has
Okay.
been invoked. You're not allowed to discuss your testimony with anyone except for witnesses, attorneys for the state of the defense. All right.
Okay,
thank you.
am I dismissed, or am I still on possible standby?
Possible standby.
Okay, gotcha.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad this worked. Okay, thank you.
All right, defense, call your next witness.
Oh, we rest, Judge.
State,
State will rest and close.
defense, do you close?
We close, Judge.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to do closing arguments on Monday. My understanding is that there's someone who has an appointment in the morning. And I know when people say they have appointments, yes. No. Okay.
I just want to bring it out right now before.
No. I appreciate that. So what we're going to do is, I know people will, they'll have an appointment and they get there at 8 a.m. and then things get a little bit off. We're hoping things work out at 8 when we go to doctor's appointments and things, but sometimes somebody's running a little late. So I know I'm being told that you'll be able to be available by 10. Is that true? All right, so this is what we'll do. We'll make plans for everyone to be here at 10. But of course, if you're not here by 10, we'll wait. No problem. I always tell everybody, put some patience in your pocket. So, and take it out as needed. So we will wait. But if you see you're not going to be able to make it at 10, I think you have the court's number. Yes. And just call. So everyone, you've heard all the evidence that you're going to hear in this case for this phase of the trial. Again, do not look at any television reports if it's on. Do not read anything. Do not do any research on anything. Everything that you need to know about this case comes from inside this courtroom. We're going to come back on Monday and we'll be back here at 10. If it ends up being, we start a little bit later than 10, we'll start a little bit later than 10. Do not discuss this case with anyone. Do not start deliberating in your own head about this case, and do not deliberate with each other. All right. All right, everyone, have a good and safe weekend. Everyone, please rise.